one.
Thank you very much. And this is the a special meeting for the West Data School Board. I just want to thank, to start, Troy and Devin for helping to put this on, as well as Lisa, Jennifer, and Aaron. You folks have just been amazing. And this is definitely hard. It's hard for the trustees, and thank you, trustees, for kind of bearing with this. It's a new situation for all of us, new world. So we're going to start with the pledge, and instead of, we're just going to mute our phones and say the pledge out privately, and then we will unmute and then get back into session. So please start. Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for posting the flag. That was awesome. Okay, to start, I'm going to reach out first to Clerk Newbold if you have any changes or updates you need to make.
Trustees, I have no changes at this time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Trustees, do you have any changes or amendments to the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson.
Trustee Johnson, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, because the remote learning and the budget have been kind of high on the radar lately, I'd like to propose a motion to just shift the agenda a little bit. So I would move the following order: the budget discussion first, the remote learning update second, the transportation discussion update third, and the certified staff update fourth.
Thank you very much for that motion. Do I have a second?
This is Trustee Newhoff. I second.
Thank you very much, Trustee Newhoff. Appreciate that. And any discussion?
Yeah, I have kind of a question. I just wanted to make sure that that works with the staff on hand and everything. If the right people are here.
Trustees, we organized it to work because we had to create a slideshow beforehand, so that will work for our staff.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we'll start with a voice vote, make it just a little bit easier to hear everyone. So Trustee Newhoff.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Trustee Smiley.
Aye.
Trustee Ozuna.
Aye.
And Trustee Johnson.
Aye.
Thank you very much for that. So we'll now make it, so item number 1 will be budget, item number 2 will be remote, item number 3 will be transportation, item 4 is certified. Is there any other changes or amendments? Hearing none, then we will go right into the discussion portion, and the first item would be budget. So I'm assuming Mr. Gillen will lead.
Good morning, Chairman and Trustees. Thanks for the opportunity to visit with you a little bit. I'll give you a budget update on the things that we know. Some things have not changed much from the last time we visited, and some things have. And then as I'll get to in just a moment, we'll talk about specifically what we're looking at for fiscal year 1920. And so essentially, as you remember from the last conversation we had yesterday, or last board meeting, we talked about a 1% potential holdback, and we also talked about some other impacts on the general fund budget, specifically TK and pay to participate, that we're still trying to identify what those dollars look like and what that does on the 1920 budget. And then we have a 5% holdback projected for 2021. And so what I'll tell you right now is some things that we're doing. We are keeping an eye on the 2021 5% holdback. Not a whole lot of information has been distributed as of yet on how that's going to work. And so for the most part, we're kind of in a wait and see approach. From the state level, providing that kind of guidance. It's not really wait and see over here. So I can tell you I'm going through the budget and I'm trying to identify how we're going to utilize funds and is there a way that we can kind of prepare for what that holdback looks like. Additionally, the other areas we have, in particular with TK, as we talk about them, TK is a source where we generate some dollars into the district. And so we're going to look at, for services we're not providing based on some information now that the state board has put out, issuing refunds to those parents who didn't receive services in March, during the closure. And so we'll be working on that process as well. And then really the big focus over the last, I'd say since the board meeting, was what's 1920 going to look like? So again, we haven't received exactly how that holdback's going to work, but I've run through and tried to project how I would think I would do it. And so you're going to see that on the screen in front of you. And so what I wanted to just briefly walk through is kind of what we see the holdback, what we see the other implications of potential dollar amounts, what that means for our fund balance this year, and then how we're going to manage through that. And so my plan is to spend a little bit of time telling you about 1920, and then I can answer any questions you have. The 1% holdback I've projected is essentially looking at all of the dollars we receive through state aid payments, both with our discretionary allotment, our salary-based apportionment, and then those specific line items that were required in statute. That'll be roughly around $2.3 million. Again, this is projected. We haven't received exactly how that holdback is going to be applied. So I'm running some numbers based on what it is I think I'm going to see. Then we have, as I talked about last week, the potential TK loss. Again, dollars are not coming in for those services. We're still going to be paying payroll based on the memo that you saw last week. And so that has a potential negative fund balance impact that we'll have to put into the general fund. And then pay to participate. And I tell you, this is just a placeholder. We're still working on that number. So we've started now to kind of come up with what our plans are going to look like. So I'll probably have some more information on that as we go along, because that has two components. We have students who have paid in to pay to participate funds that will have to look at what our reimbursement process is going to be for that, along with what the payments are going to be at coaches. So that's a placeholder of the impact right now, and we'll continue to evaluate that. And over the next, I'd say, week to week and a half, we'll have some more clarity on what that looks like. But as of right now, we're talking about a $3 million adjustment to the general fund's fund balance. So at the end of the year, that would be the impact. So a couple ways we can balance that. So we have a professional development fund, and what we're allowed to do is be able to reclass if we have teachers or the district has done a professional development program for the district or within their schools, or particularly at school year start, we do professional development in the buildings. Those dollars can actually be paid out of professional development funds. And so what we would look to do is try to, excuse me, I couldn't hear that question. Okay, I'll move on, and then I can answer questions. So what we would look to reclass is a dollar amount, essentially 1 day of the certified general fund costs into the professional development fund to cover those expenses, which again would release some burden on the general fund. Retirement severance, if you remember, or if you've been following all along, Percy has essentially given a sick leave rate holiday. They did that, and they issued that in December. So we're going to use those dollars. We didn't change our budget. We essentially knew that there was a potential, or there was the actual of the savings. And so now we're going to use those dollars. So we won't necessarily adjust the budget, but we know that'll offset any losses associated with the general fund. The third item on the list is the school allocations. So we allocate dollars for supplies and for course fee allocations out of the general fund to the schools. We have a proposal out there that we'll be sharing with the regional directors and then also with the principals about starting to pull some of those dollars back. So if they've already incurred a purchase order, if they've already incurred a cost, they'll be kept whole. But essentially, we'll be trying to reduce spending at the school level, since a substantial portion of what we're doing with the remote learning, the district has those costs and have already budgeted for them. And then you're going to see kind of a catch-all line item, other various budgets of roughly $548,000. That's some savings in textbook costs I've gone through and identified and visited with the budget manager and let them know they haven't incurred that cost. I'd like them to hold on to those dollars. And we're going to have some savings associated with transportation and gasoline costs specifically. Workers' compensation, with a lot of staff working from home, we don't anticipate claims will be as much as we anticipated or did when we built the budget for the year. So essentially, I've evaluated what those claims costs will look like through the end of the year and identified some budget savings there. And then we had like $25,000 in the insurance premiums we've already paid for the year associated with our liability insurance that we had savings for. And so I lumped all those together. I have visited, a lot of those are areas that I already have impact over and that I oversee on a daily basis. And I've visited with those budget managers in the other areas and let them know that essentially they'll be helping to cover the shortfall this year, and all of them were aware of that. So in short, the goal is that we're going to utilize this plan as we see it right now for how we're going to cover the 1% holdback and the other general fund impacts for 1920. As the 1% holdback comes out and is finalized on how that impact is actually going to look, I'm going to revisit this again, and we'll take a look and make sure that my expectation of what the projected holdback will be aligns with what it's actually going to be. I'm hoping to get some of that information this week or early next week, so that this way we can kind of finish and close the door on 1920, and then start looking at 2021 and what the impacts of a 5% holdback will be on that. With that, I can answer any questions you have.
Mr. Chairman, this is Steve.
Steve, you'll be first, but I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Trustees, what I'm going to do is I'll call on each one of us, just make sure that we're somewhat orderly because of the phone issue. And also, if everyone would just kind of hold any other questions back until the one trustee is finished. So, Trustee Smiley, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I got a little ahead. My question, Jonathan, is on the professional development fund, the 841,000 approximately number there. Were there any extra expenses incurred because we had to do a lot of scrambling as far as getting a hold of staff and helping staff, figure out how to get onto teams and things like that. Was just wondering if there were any expenses incurred or if we're going to be out anything for all the scrambling we had to do with professional development and getting teachers online and so forth.
Chairman, Trustee, thank you for the question. Not that I'm aware of. All of those staff were already ready and willing to start providing in that training. And I guess to go in a little bit further into the professional development fund itself, essentially how we're paying for that is from savings we already have embedded in the fund. And so I don't want you to see that and say, oh, we're dramatically negatively impacting professional development. We had some carryover fund balance that we're essentially going to utilize, plus the expenses we didn't incur this year, since most of the travel was done. I have to say, people around the district were very good at when they had things scheduled and this started to roll out and we started to look at, okay, there's no more travel, there's no more conferences. We had a big team effort across the district to try to make sure to get those things canceled. Any people who had problems with vendors, I reached out to them specifically and worked with the vendors. So we were able to capture a lot of, I don't want to call it cost savings, I guess, but we were able to minimize the impact on our professional development fund structure as a whole.
Okay, thank you. And to continue on with that a little bit, that also, as far as starting up school next year, that'll be out of next year's budget, correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
This is Trustee Ozuna. I don't see our chairman listed anymore on here.
The chairman is still listed in the attendees under the People's Group. See if we can reach out to him.
He is on mute though.
And now it looks like he's dropped off.
Would you like to continue? Never mind, we'll wait till he gets back on.
Mr. Gillen, while we're waiting, can you cover the retirement severance piece of your presentation again?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was having problems with being unmuted. Chairman, trustees, yes, I can. So essentially what Percy did, and Dave, you can feel free to chime in we pay a rate associated with sick leave that then people capture at the end of retirement and are able to use for dollar amounts associated with insurance. And so that Percy had enough money in the fund to be able to pay out their actuarial evaluated costs. And so they essentially gave us an 18-month break from making that payment. So the amount I've calculated here is essentially the amount we're going to save this year based on current costs we incurred before the holiday or the break started. We should have a similar amount going into next year as well. And so it's perfect timing. I don't know how else to say it, considering the holdbacks we're having. We can use these to essentially offset, since it is a one-time cost savings, even though it's crossing 2 fiscal years. And we're looking at the budget reductions or the holdbacks as one time as well. So they're a perfect match for offsetting the revenues with the associated expenses.
Trustee Ozuna, just for your information, this is Dave Roberts, that the amount that we pay, so for every anybody that's eligible for Percy, we pay a Percy retirement fund. The employee pays a retirement amount, and then we pay this additional amount that is for the sick leave benefit upon retirement. That amount is 1.45% of all of or 1.16%, I'm sorry, of the gross salary or the eligible salary for all those people. And that fund was overfunded, and that's why Percy gave an 18-month holiday for that. But we still had it in our budget for this year, and we're having savings directly from that.
Thanks for going through that additional detail. Both of you, I appreciate it.
No problem. My apologies. Were there any other trustees who needed to speak?
Mr. Chairman, this is Trustee Johnson. We didn't go through everybody, so I think if you wanted to keep going in order.
Okay, so it was Trustee Smiley and Ozuna, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trustee Johnson, since you're on the line, please, you're next.
Okay, thank you. First of all, this Teams is, I know we're having a little bit of technical, but this is really cool. I mean, I just tried the closed caption and it works pretty well too, so I'm really excited. And so again, I echo thank you to the tech team and others. Jonathan, really good summary. I had a quick question, 2 quick questions. One is, we know that there's going to be some federal funds from the stimulus that are going to come in, and I just wanted to kind of know where your thoughts were headed for those, if that's kind of something you're thinking maybe we need to have in our back pocket for the 2021 period of time. And then that's the other kind of question I have goes along with that, and it is, you mentioned that we're looking at just kind of a planning around 5%, and I wanted to know just at a high level kind of what your thinking is right now around that as far as being able to handle that.
Chairman, trustees, thank you very much for the questions. I'll start with the stimulus plan update. So as you're all aware, the stimulus package was passed. Now it's a matter of figuring out how those dollars, 1, are coming to us in a calculation, and 2, how much we're going to get, and then 3, what can we use it on? And all of those questions, more clarity is still needed. So we have some ideas. A lot of the finance people, we've all gotten together. We're having weekly calls where we're talking about what are the ideas, what are the dollar amounts, how much do we think we're going to get. It's going to run through title, and then we're going to get anywhere between 81 and 83% of our title allocation that we received this year. And so that number could be anywhere between, I've ran some projections of $2.6 to $3 million that we will receive in stimulus funding. Now that's not a for sure going to show up anytime soon. So what we've heard from Superintendent Ibarra during the webinars was that there'll become an application that will come out soon. I believe they have still a couple of weeks before the feds issue that application. Then the state needs to apply for it, and then that's how the funds flow. So part of the reason to not show it in this is I'm just not really certain it's going to show up before June 30. And so then it becomes more of an accounting question of when did I earn it and the accruals associated with it. And that's number one. Number two, I'm still trying to gather feedback. I think we all are as finance people on what specifically those dollars can be utilized for. Obviously, there's great clarity on you can use it for title related programs and for some specific COVID related items. After that, it gets a little bit more clarity is needed, I guess. And so I have specifically sent in questions to the CCSSO, who's the one helping kind of write the Q&A and helping come up with how the dollars could be utilized around what we can do and whether it qualifies. If we have a general fund holdback, can we use it against that? What are some general fund related expenses that may cover? And so I haven't got answers to my Q&A back. So what I heard yesterday was that they got 2,000 questions. So mine's in there somewhere. They did provide some clarity. And I know even folks at the State Department kind of know that I've submitted those questions. And so as they get information back from the Q&As, they're forwarding it on to me so that we can take a look at it and see how the impact is. We got some clarity on one of the questions. They answered it more of how the holdback is affected by the federal stimulus at a state level. They didn't really get as particular into the LEA level. So I'm kind of still waiting on that information so that I can say, what can we use those for and can they offset impact? And so for your first question, I think there's going to be more to come. And so that one I really look at and I say that it might be a dollar amount that we kind of know is coming, but we might not know specifically how we're going to use it for another couple of weeks still. And then the second one, as far as what the holdback entails, there's not been any clear provided information on what it's going to look like. So there's discussion of whether it affects salaries, there's discussion of whether it affects discretionary. I think they're having lots of conversations. I know there's an emergency task force that's also helping with some of those. And so the governor's office and Greg Wilson has been awesome at really trying to get as much information as he can get out to us at the district level so that we can start planning. And so I'm hopeful that he knows many schools are already in negotiations and are talking about salaries for next year. And so I think the idea is that we're going to get some more clarity on that holdback hopefully this week. And so I'm hoping by the end of the week I can get some clarity on what that looks like. I can start then calculating at a state level. That's what it looks like. This is what it means at a district level for us, and how is our ways that we're going to try to solve that problem. And then the ace in the hole, or the real outliers, right? How do we use the stimulus funding? And I think that'll even be another couple of weeks before we can match specifically how those dollars can help us. So really more information to come. And now that we've kind of done some work on 1920, 2021 is next on my list.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Trustee Johnson. Trustee Newhoff, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question, because it sort of plays into this, but have we started negotiations? I haven't seen anything on that. What's the status of that? And that might be, I guess, more for Mr. Roberts, but.
We have not as of yet. And Dave, I don't know if you want to share anything extra beyond that.
Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, we have not started negotiations. We have, as recently as today, have met with our association president and the IEA discussing that. There's, and Jonathan hasn't even got into next year, but there's a lot of things still in the works that we're hearing about that may affect next year's budget significantly, and we really need to kind of keep our powder dry for a minute and see where that's at, along with House Bill 523 and some career ladder changes that are very significant, and whether those get implemented or not. And we are anticipating that we'll hear news from the governor's office in the near term regarding those issues.
Okay, thank you. Then my other question is for Mr. Gillen. As we look ahead to 2021 budgeting and the potential for a 5% holdback, we're conceiving of that now, assuming that the levy passes in May. Is that correct?
Chairman and trustees, that is correct.
And so if it doesn't, we'd be looking at 10+% holdback.
Chairman and trustees, yes, that is true. It would be roughly 10.3%.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustees, do you have any follow-ups? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Gillen, thank you very much for the presentation. Very thorough as usual. Really appreciate your time on this.
Thank you.
Next item on discussion is the remote education. And I'm not sure, is this Mr. Nesbitt, is he available, Sherry?
I am.
Oh, you are? You didn't sound like Sherry. Then
Thank
Mr.
you.
Nesbitt, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, trustees, Dr. Reynolds, remote learning has planned as continuation just from last week. I can give you updates on what my 9 departments are in the process of doing. But basically, from a 10,000 foot level, what we're looking at are teachers are preparing for the 13th and curriculum that will be used and pushed out to students. And we're making sure that students have access. So with that, federal programs has been calling families, translators to determine needs there. We have had some questions on student athletics, and the SIC and District 3 have met, and they're still in a hold pattern, waiting to see, but most likely we're done for the year with that, and they've moved on to what might happen in the summer. Special needs department have been doing training for teachers on how to conduct IEP meetings online and working with their staff and with the gen ed teachers on curriculum that's going out. Counseling department has made a lot of progress. High school counselors have been working with student lists to make sure graduation is number one. Middle and elementary are working through processes with the special ed department that they can help with, as long as our social and emotional learning resources. In the curriculum department, a letter went out this week to parents of concurrent credit, explaining what each university is doing with that. And so we've just trying to been communicating as much as possible and working through our plans. And if you have any specific questions, I could answer those at this time.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Trustee Ozuna.
Thank you, Mr. Nesbitt. I've heard a lot of really great things from parents in the community about the teacher calls that are taking place and the plan that's out there. And so, thanks to everyone for the effort around all of that. The one concern that I've heard many times over and over is really at the high school level. And I think people are still really focused, on the grade aspect and the GPA. And there's some concern about, with less grades in the grade book, those individual grades are weighted much more heavily than they would have been with a lot of activity in the grade book. And what I'm hearing is how that's being handled and the ability to reassess or rework old assignments, whatever kind of language we want to put around that, but that varies class to class, school to school, teacher to teacher. There's a lot of variability around that. Which I can appreciate, but I also share the concern that I'm hearing from these parents about maybe in areas where there's less flexibility on that and these individual assignments that have so much weight. And I think Trustee Newhoff hit on this at our last meeting, that he was asking specifically around are we considering putting any guidance in place that is a must-do for some of our teachers to follow in how we're handling some of this reassessment?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, of course, reassessment, Ozuna, I'm sorry, who did I say? Whoops. Newhoff? Oh, yeah, that's probably because she mentioned Dr. Newhoff. My apologies. So Trustee Ozuna, I could certainly bring this up with the regional directors at the next principal meeting, which is happening shortly. And we can talk about some of that. Reassessment, of course, is a tool that teachers have, and there's an appropriate time for it and a time when it's not. So we could certainly put some guidelines out on that. I don't think we would be able to say with so much variation in classes that, you know, it's the reassessment is going to happen for everyone. But we'll certainly have that conversation about, especially the weighting. I'm not sure that sometimes that some teachers understand how the weighting happens and have looked at that, but we'll take a look at that and see where we are, see if we can take any of the variability out of that we can.
Thanks. And then one additional question that I'm hearing concern about is that I understand that the SAT has been canceled. Something that I'm hearing from parents is concern around, you know, their individual student may still need to take the SAT, you know, in order to go where they're going next. And they're curious about, will that still be paid by the state at a later date? And then the other concern is, how do we make sure that they're getting the instruction that they need in order to be prepared for that?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Ozuna, so far what we know about the SAT is that they moved the date and then they actually canceled the date, and then it's been removed as a graduation requirement. So what's left over is students that need an SAT score to go to college. And whether the state is going to continue to pay for that, I can't answer at this point. But I know students can certainly take the SAT on their own, and there's all kinds of prep for that. You know, we could certainly help with some of that, but I'm going to have to think through the logistics of that.
Thanks, Mr. Nesbitt.
Thank you, Trustee Ozuna. Trustee Smiley, did you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just making sure my mic was on. One, Don, question that I have is, you know, the mechanics of graduation. I'm assuming that the graduation ceremonies are all either canceled or postponed. Maybe you can bring us up to speed on that, and just how the mechanics of getting our seniors their diplomas and so forth are going to work. Are they going to have to come down to the school and pick them up? How's that going to work?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Smiley, diplomas, we will make sure kids get their diplomas, whether it's pickup or mail home. As far as graduation ceremonies, you know, we're still hoping that by the time the end of June comes around, or the end of May comes around, that possibly we'll be able to get together. But I think that's a kind of a hope in the wind, to be actually honest with you. We haven't heard from Boise State. They're still in hold mode for use of their facilities. We talked about maybe some other possibilities, you know, a little bit later in June to celebrate this class, and that is on our agenda. But right now, of course, the high schools are trying to get devices to kids. So we've had some, like I said, I'll say 10,000-foot conversations on that. But we do want to be able to celebrate this class somehow. And there's a lot of great ideas out there, and we'll come up with something.
Okay, because that's something that, you know, if you could kind of as these things come down, if you could kind of keep those of us on the board updated with that, because frankly, I don't know if the rest of the trustees agree, but for me, those graduation ceremonies are some of the most moving things and some of the greatest opportunities to celebrate our students that we have. So it would be a real pity not to do something in which we, even if we have to do it, remotely somehow to celebrate those. The other one is, as you know, the state board has, issued a lot of guidelines as recently as yesterday, as far as, we've basically, we'll have, they've pretty much canceled, the in-class settings, but they have allowed us to do the soft closing. And the article in today's paper mentioned that they did a lot of talking about, they used the word or. And I'm just wondering how that ties up with us as far as how we're going to be going forward with remote learning. My understanding is that the governor, when he made the original announcement, said that, grades are frozen as of March 13th. And I was wondering if you could bring us up to date as to whether any of those are going to be changing, any of the directives that we've already received.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Smiley, I don't think the governor ever said that grades were frozen. I would just be surprised if he would get that granular with things, but well, that was where I was. Yeah, as far as what the state board did yesterday, several of us were online for that meeting, and it does help us out. They did several things. They extended the soft closure to May, or gave districts leeway if they meet certain criteria, which I assume that we'll have at their next board meeting on Monday. And there were a couple hints on what that criteria might be, but certainly it had to be, geographically that the area was doing well with the COVID virus, and that the recommendation from local central district health would be in line with what the school district tried to do. And then they asked the governor to use his executive powers to waive some instructional hours, and that is the hours of instruction total, not per class. And then the civics exam requirements, and then the IRI, the Idaho Reading Assessment Indicator. So we'll see if the governor actually does use his executive power to do that, but the state board did make that recommendation. The other thing that they were able to do was to waive the requirement for the 60 hours per credit. So that would be for an individual class of high school. And they could do that because that was an IDAPA rule. And so those are the things. We attend those meetings online and try to keep as up to date as possible, so that it fits right in with our remote learning plan. And we're going to keep going strong until, if by some miracle we were able to open and come back to school. That would certainly help us at least celebrate students for sure, and then finish off anything that we might be able to do as far as students' work and learning. But really, we kind of came up with this today. The Ready for Fall is kind of what we want to accomplish with our remote learning plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, the other question I have is: Are we getting any numbers as far as the numbers of seniors that have responded, have picked up their laptops? Do we have any ideas about how many people are signing up, or are these things that we are for testing, AP and SAT and ACT for college admission and so forth? Are we going to have any way of following up and finding out how many of our seniors are going to be able to take advantage of these things?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Smiley, we don't have any of those numbers currently at, as I speak. We could possibly come up with some of those numbers as we look at graduation requirements and as we get information back from specific teachers across the district about who's doing what in their class. So we might be able to have some of those numbers later. This week, right now, the plan is most schools are starting Wednesday to deliver their laptops. Meridian High might start today, actually, because of the high number that they have.
Okay. And so we won't have any of that information probably for a few weeks at minimum.
Correct.
Okay, I'll probably have a couple of follow-ups later, but that's good for now.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. Trustee Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You caught me off guard. I'm usually last. Dawn, I have a couple questions and I kind of sent you some feedback I'd been getting from my area. But let me just start with the first question. Yesterday, I listened to the state board meeting late last night because it's recorded and online. And one of the things that they're concerned about is around academic rigor and the uniformity and consistency across the state that we are required constitutionally to do. And one of the things that was brought up in that discussion was that some districts are going to continue teaching through the standards for the grade level for this year. And then some districts are saying no new material. And they were looking at kind of whether or not they would weigh in and maybe create some sort of guidance around the uniformity. And I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on that because I think we're in the no new material right now. And I wanted to know what the impacts would be if we were to shift to finish out and be ready for fall.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, I do remember the question about rigor from the state board meeting. Obviously, it is something that we're concerned about because we have high rigor standards in our district. Students are in class. So I think there are two types of districts out there in the state right now. There are ones that are one-to-one with technology, have been for a while, and there are ones that are not. We're one of those districts that are not. We're closer. We're a little over 2-to-1 with our devices. So some districts, for instance, like Nampa, were able to move forward more quickly because they knew who the students were and they were already set up one-to-one. As far as no new learning, we kind of have two phases in our plan. So phase one is let's make sure the ship is working, and phase two would be where we would implement new learning, especially at you kind of have to divide this out at the secondary level. It's going to be different than the elementary level. For instance, our current concurrent credit classes, for instance, we have to go ahead and teach through the syllabus. So we've been making plans for that. New learning will be a little easier at the high school because we do have enough devices to try to go one-to-one with students there. Our problem more is going to be with connectivity. So we're working on that also, and we're probably going to be lagging a little bit behind on that, to be honest with you, just because of the availability of hotspots. So at the secondary level, the first thing is to make sure it's working, and that's phase one. And then phase two would be to move into, all right, let's get you caught up. There will be some new learning involved with what's going on. So ours is more of a blended model. The middle and elementary school, it's a little more difficult because we don't have a device in every student's hand. And so as soon as we get this, again, phases are similar. So as soon as we get the drop off and pickup down, then we would start looking at more new learning, especially at the elementary level, finishing off the year-round standards that have been started all year. But really, what we want to do is be able to say that our kids are ready for fall, and we're not going to have to do a ton of remediation to get them to where they need to be. So yeah, so I would say we're a blended model between kind of what's happening out there.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful. The other kind of, I guess I probably am putting them on the record. I wanted to make sure I gave you a heads up, but I wanted to just talk a little bit through them. The two feedbacks, and I will say my feedback has been more at the elementary level than at the middle or high school, although I've had a little bit from the middle school perspective from parents. And I don't know, I'm not sure on the teacher feedback that I've gotten what level they teach. I haven't asked that question unless I already knew the teacher. But from the parent perspective, there's a couple questions that have kind of consistently came up, and that's around this: how much time, if things are coming in a paper format to my child at an elementary level, how much time am I going to have to commit to that, and what do I need to know in order to help my child? Because with a paper level at elementary, you can imagine that kindergartners and first graders especially are still in their reading learning pretty significantly. So that's a question from parents that I've been getting, and it'd be helpful to kind of understand what your thinking is there. So I can, I guess, just know.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, it's actually a pretty good question. What we're going to provide is what the state is really asking us to provide, and that's 4 hours of instruction. Now, whether you get through all that as a parent, we certainly don't expect some parents, especially parents that are working, to come home and do 4 hours of instruction with all 4 of their kids, before they get up to go to work the next morning. So, and then I think the other thing would be, parents are wondering, well, how do I even do this? So the first thing that we have is we're going to have parent tips every week. The first one is basically to set up your environment in a way that's conducive to learning. In other words, simple things that probably we could all get your kids on a schedule. Make sure they're getting up in the morning. And then here's some things you can do at these times, or at least have the kids do it at these times. Fairly easy, self-directed type things, especially at the kindergarten through 2 level. And then each week the next week we have planned already some tips for reading and writing. And just to help parents out a little bit as they really become the teacher at home. Does that answer your questions?
It does. It does, and I really appreciate you guys thinking through this, because I know that there's a lot to think through. I'm going to parlay on it a little bit, and it's really around. It kind of goes hand in hand with the consistent message I've been hearing from teachers, particularly around the flexibility, because the elementary school teachers are in this in a better, maybe not a better boat, but the ability, they know all their students and they know them. It's not like a middle or high school where they have 5 or 6 classes. They have, a set class of 30 or 30-ish students. So they know them all, they know their parents, and they also now know pretty much what the level of device and connectivity capability are for their classroom. And so they're in a position to be able to, with that flexibility, design their classroom teaching to meet the standards for their classroom. But what's been kind of communicated is that they're not sure around whether or not they really have that flexibility and if they can do that. And so what I'm looking for is what do we need to do in order to give them that flexibility? Because the scenarios that I've been getting is in a classroom, a standard classroom setting, I put my instructions together to support the main learners in there, and there was a lot of self-direction. And then I spent my time working with the folks that needed a little extra help, or that needed some on both ends, right? Needed that push or needed a little extra help. In an online or remote structure, I can do the same thing if I have the flexibility, and I can do it through many different modalities, from a video to a phone call to paper. There's all sorts of different modalities if I have the flexibility to do that. And so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts, or what are the challenges that we need to move out of their way in order to allow them to do it, because I think it would really help parents and kids out.
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, I think my best answer to this is that we're going to try to remove as many barriers as possible and stay within the parameters of what we're required to do in law. So actually this afternoon, if it hasn't went out already, we have a page of a question and answer kind of fact sheet on giving teachers kind of the banks of the river and some guidance at every level on what this looks like and what to be aware of, some of the pros and cons that go with that, so they can deal with the cons. And it's a pretty good document actually, and I would rather just send that to you and go through the whole thing. But that will go out today if it hasn't already.
That'd be great. What if I could ask to send that document for all of us? And then, is there anything we can do from a community relations perspective to provide some cover or free up some flexibility for the district as a whole in that regard?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, I don't understand your question.
Sorry, let me, there is some legal requirements, and I'm aware of some and probably not aware of a lot. But is there something, just like the governor is using executive power to free up or provide capabilities for districts, is there something that we should be putting on the radar as a district that could help free up even more of that flexibility from an online or a remote learning capability?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Johnson, okay, now I understand what you're asking. So we do have 2 letters from the U.S. Department of Education. They gave us a little bit of leeway with that, but not a lot. So we're still required to provide equal access, equitable content and delivery to our students. They gave us a little bit of leeway in how we handle our IEP and our 504, but really those are rights that students and parents have, and we still have to follow that. So that does limit us a little bit in making sure that we have equitable access for all students, and this document that we have for teachers, that's actually the first question is what is meant by all students. So as we move forward, we just need to be careful of that, and we need to be mindful of it. And teachers will be very creative, and we're gonna, what it comes down to, they're gonna do the best they can for their kids, and we just need to make sure they're aware of the things they need to have on their radar as they plan their lessons, and then we'll move forward. And I'm sure some good ideas will come out, and we'll be able to do some things. We want to be as flexible as we can, given those parameters set forward by the Office of Civil Rights and the U.S. Department of Education.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Newhoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that concerned some people about yesterday's developments at the state board was the open-ended nature of their directive to schools, and, leaving it open that, at least in some areas, if the health conditions are right, they can come open. I would actually, if I was a betting man, I'd bet at some point. maybe the end of this month. But, you know, I don't know one way or the other. But what I do know is that the kids have been through an awful lot of disruption. And what one of my big concerns is if we did reopen before the end of the year and go back to some form of the nature of instruction that we had, you know, prior to closing the schools, is that the kids are going to have the rules of the game changed on them twice. You know, for instance, we've made a grading statement that their grades are frozen. If we did go back, let's say at the beginning of May, are we committed to keeping their grades frozen, for instance, and the other situations that they're operating under now?
Mr. Chairman, Trustee Newhoff, I almost called you Trustee Ozuna.
Oh, she's better looking than I am, but you know, it's fair enough.
Well, you know, I'm not going to argue. You know, I would say we'd have to have that discussion. I would hate, given all the disruption, to change things on kids again. But let's say we did open the 1st of May. You know, we'd have to consider that. You know, that now we'd probably have to have a grace period there for a while. But let's say, you know, I would highly doubt that we would be open the 1st of May. That's a pretty hopeful scenario. I think it's more like if we looked at what would happen if we were able to open at the end of May, you know, just to finish off school and let kids graduate and sign yearbooks and do some things like that, then absolutely not. It would be more of a, I just couldn't see us moving away from the, you can only improve your grade.
Yeah. Well, you know, the scenario I sit and look at, I think about a high school kid who's riding all A's right now, and you just told them, or we've just told them that your grades are frozen. So really right now, they don't have to do anything to keep their grade at some level, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that.
And, but, you know, I mean, in some ways, it's the same thing as, you know, a kid riding into the final and realizing that they can flunk it and still get an A if their grade's sitting that way and grading math works out that way. I mean, it's in some ways it's the same scenario. So I just, you know, I'm concerned about what that transition could look like. You know, that we're going to need to, I think we change the rules of the game again at our peril in terms of relations with our patrons. So, I don't know. That's, you know, that's part of the problem with the uncertainty right now. I mean, everything's uncertain for everyone. It's a lot of anxiety. Obviously, there's great disruption for the kids and missing rites of passage and so forth. So I just hope that we're going to be conscious of that if the tide does turn here and the guidance from the health officials changes. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Trustees, do you have any follow-up? Okay, seeing none, then. I'm sorry, did somebody speak?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was accidentally not on mute.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And that means we'll be moving then on to item number 2. And John, thank you very much. I truly appreciate your updates. That brings us to the transportation item number 3, and Mr. Updike will be leading.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Reynolds. Just like last week, Jonathan and I will be tag teaming the transportation update. I get to tell you about the fun things, the good things that we're doing for our students, and he's going to talk dollars with you. So right now we are meeting and working together interdepartmentally to plan services and distribute them using the school buses, using primarily what we're calling a hub model, where we bring maybe a school bus with meals and hygiene services and packets to an area that is underserved or where there is high need identified. We're first starting, and our rollout is going to be Monday. We're starting a meal distribution site at the Northwest Point Apartments in the parking lot there. That's based on a waiver that Jessica, our food service director, acquired from USDA to serve meals there. And that is still in process and still in development, but all signs are pointing to a rollout on Monday. And that is going to be our test case for what the need is and what services are required, and then we'll expand as we see more needs to fill in the community. That is essentially what we're looking at right now. We're also working with special services for the needs that those students have that may be different, and the families maybe can't access those hubs or go to the schools. Maybe they have large things like wheelchairs that we need to distribute using the buses. Those are also in process as well, and I'm working with Ramona Lee on that. And so I'd like you to hold questions to the end and then let Jonathan go ahead and jump in and talk dollars.
Chairman and trustees, thank you. So during the last board meeting, we talked a little bit about what it would cost, and I had said, hey, we have a proposal, and then Cascade had a different dollar amount and a different idea of how we could utilize our funds effectively. And so since that meeting, we've had quite a few conversations with Cascade. I have asked them to try to calculate what essentially it would cost us for overhead on a rate basis. And I asked for that so that we could start running numbers, and also they could start running numbers. So essentially we both ran numbers in parallel, and so that I could see kind of what they assumed the impact would be and what we would, to make sure that we're on the same page. So lots of really good conversation, I think, as we talked through what the impacts are going to be for them and their operations. And so I've gotten a chance to look at those to be able to keep their management staff. And I guess I should back up for a second, because I don't know, I had to step out for a moment. So they actually put most of their management staff, it was a corporate-wide decision, not a Boise or West Data-based decision, but Cascade as a whole asked for their management staff. They put those people on unemployment with their last day as of Friday. So we received that information from them. We asked some questions, especially since we knew our board meeting was coming up, and that was a Cascade choice decision. So as far as across their entity. And so with that, we also had conversations about what it would cost, again, to have those staff back and ready and the buses ready to roll so that we can start doing many of the things that Ian discussed. And so the cost would be roughly $1.6 million, and that assumes that that's throughout the rest of the academic year. So I just had run, again, a worst case scenario of what it looks like if buses didn't roll in April, May, and June, and what that would be to cover overhead, which again, their overhead costs are those management personnel that we need to help bring them in and be able to help bring the drivers. And if we design new routes associated with distributing materials and products and things for special education, those are the individuals that are going to help us with that. And then the dollars are going to go towards the lease to make sure the bus is there so that we can run it. And so that is kind of our recommendation, our expectations, is that that's what we're going to do going forward. And I'm open to listening to any concerns that you have. And then with that, the next step would be a contract amendment, and we'll be able to have that ready for the next board meeting. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Trustee Ozuna, would you like to start?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I actually don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ozuna. Trustee Smiley?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and Jonathan and Ian, I'm a little bit curious with the management and staff. We're saying that we're putting them on unemployment, or that Cascade has directed them. But yet, if we were to utilize that staff to do any of the transportation things that Ian described, as well as the drivers. Now, my understanding is it's more cost efficient for those drivers to go on unemployment rather than to continue to be employees. And I'm not quite sure, because what I see here is then if we then have to turn around and pay to get them back on, is there some double dipping and inefficiencies going on there?
I can start with that, Chairman and Trustee. So the management staff would not be on unemployment if we approved with going forward with paying overhead. They would essentially come back. And so Cascade has lots of contracts throughout the nation, and so they made a nationwide decision to say those staff, while we're working with your individual districts on what it looks like, we're furloughing you, putting you on allowing you to go collect unemployment. And so the management staff would essentially come back. And then the conversations we have had with Cascade is that they anticipate being able to have drivers available when it is we have that plan and that we're ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to go with their assumption that they are continuing to do that legwork and have those conversations with those individuals, the drivers specifically, so that we can be ready to go when we decide, when we do the things that Ian is discussing. And then Ian, if you have other stuff you want to add, please feel free.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Jonathan. So would that mean from a budget standpoint, since those employees would no longer be part of payroll, would that be a savings in what we're recompensing to Cascade?
Chairman and trustees, so again, Cascade is a contractor, so none of those individuals are on our payroll. And so from our end, and I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, it's just a matter of how much we are paying into the contract that we have with Cascade. And then more specifically, the concerns, which I don't think we'll have answered for quite a while, is what that impact is on our revenue projections for next year and the year after associated with transportation. As you know, a substantial chunk of our contract is reimbursable. There is still the questions hanging around of not so much the items that Ian discussed, specifically those have been discussed and are allowable reimbursable miles, albeit at a slightly lower rate. But some of just the contract payouts, that's still something the state is going with. And so we'll still have that conversation, and I imagine we'll have that conversation for quite a few weeks still to come. Did that answer your question, Trustee Smiley?
Well, I know that last week we discussed a little bit about how that, there are going to be savings now, but it'll be expenses later when we start dealing with the reimbursement funding situation. So I'm just wondering if we had a little bit better handle on the budget applications moving forward, for these extra costs and things like that. Are we still good on the budget? Will we be getting money back in the budget? Are there areas where we could do savings to help us in years going forward? And those kind of questions. And I realize that probably a lot of that is still up in the air.
Chairman, trustees, thank you though for the questions. I love that you're thinking about that and that you're asking that. So there will be some savings between what we paid in what we anticipated paying in the contract when we started the year and what it is we're going to spend now. If you notice on the 1920 calculation, you didn't see a whole lot. You didn't actually see anything referenced about the contract. Essentially, that savings is going to be roll into fund balance, and it'll be used next year to offset what I anticipate will be a reduction in our revenues associated with the contract. So what I'm trying to keep us from doing is essentially spending the savings and then having the revenue hit the following year. So I'm trying to manage that and make sure that a dollar saved is kind of saved but it's only saved to use later to offset reduced revenues.
And Mr. Chairman, that would also probably involve, dealing with the federal stimulus bill, because I think some of that money was for, that kind of stuff, and I'm not quite sure how that works either.
Chairman, trustees, I can answer a little bit about that. There was a lot of conversation during the stimulus bill about what it could and would be used for, right? And I kind of gave an update on here's some things we know and here's some things we don't. During that conversation, there was lots of conversation about, hey, we have districts across the U.S. who contract and who even employ bus drivers, and they're going to be negatively impacted by schools closing. And I've even gotten some emails from people who work not for Cascade, but actually for other transportation entities, and they've just, they've sent us saying, hey, we thought this was in the stimulus package, and it kind of was. It references contractors in the stimulus package, and then it says where practicable. And so that's where the locality and the individual LEA or organization can kind of make the judgment on if funding is available and how we try to keep our contractors as whole as we can, which is part of the conversation we've been having with Cascade as far as with our limited dollars, how do we use this to best effectively meet the needs of our students and our stakeholders and make sure we're ready to go when the time comes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. Trustee Johnson, do you have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one, and then I have one comment. Jonathan, I was just curious if you know how, because Cascade is not just a West Data contractor, they have contracts all over the place. If there was consistency in how the different school entities that they're working with are handling get this kind of same topic. I imagine it's the same everywhere.
Chairman and trustees, thank you for the question. A little bit. So what I'll tell you is some conversations that we had with the regional representatives, our contract apparently in Idaho is different than their other contracts. And so we're having different conversations than in other places where their contract is just being essentially, I believe, paid at like a rate they've agreed to already in the contract. So I'm assuming they probably have some language around if buses aren't running, it's probably usually built around snow days or, a closure for a week because of something that they would have a payment they've calculated. We don't have that kind of information in our contract. So part of what we're having discussions is how we figure out how all this works, because we are a little different here at West Data with Cascade than they are in other states.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the comment I have is I just wanted to, this is like extremely challenging, I know, because it's trying to maintain the viability of the budget and support students and teachers in the educational learning and our moral imperative there, as well as kind of make sure that we don't, on the other side of that, hurt, a vendor who already has probably got some economic impacts. I guess I just wanted to put the support out there that if it comes down to it, knowing that we're potentially going to have some major budget pullbacks potentially for next year, I'm just going to put it out there that I would always support making sure that we maintain the student and teacher side of that first.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Trustee Newhoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. I don't have any questions now.
Thank you very much, Trustee Newhoff. Trustee, is there any follow-up? Okay, hearing none, then we will move on to the certified portion, item number 4. Assuming Mr. Roberts will lead.
Thank you, Chairman Klopfenstein, trustees, Superintendent Randalls. I don't have a lot to add from what I've talked about before, and I would stand mostly for questions. Our certified staff are back to work as much as they can be. They're doing some amazing things out there, getting prepared to provide learning materials and learning things for all of our students. From what we hear, it's pretty positive, and they're excited to be back. Things are going to be different. In my world, regarding the evaluation change that we've made and rolling out that to principals, we're going to have to. I'm going to have to come up with some messaging for all of our staff so they understand that. and not, but I don't want that to be distracting to what we're doing for students. So we're meeting and talking about how we roll that out, how we communicate the reasons for that, and how it just continues to do the great things that we're doing in West Ada. All teachers are getting paid their contracts. We don't have any expectation of that changing. I know we still get questions. I've sent out a couple memos now stating clearly that all certified staff are continuing to get paid, but they still question whether they're going to get paid. I'm not sure how to answer that question for them, other than that we told them that you're going to get paid. I don't know of anything else. If there's any specific questions that you guys have, I would for sure stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts. Trustee Ozuna, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. I don't have any additional questions.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ozuna. Trustee Smiley, do you have any questions or comments?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Smiley. Trustee Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Newhoff?
Well, at the risk of Mr. Roberts thinking he's always going to get off easy, I don't have any questions either.
I appreciate that, Trustee Newhoff.
Thank you very much. So that basically brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for supporting us, especially staff. This has been obviously a very new situation, and being our first really online Teams meeting, it went off quite well. So thank you very much, and this brings us into the adjournment portion. Do I have a motion?
So moved from Trustee Newhoff.
Trustee Newhoff.
Second from Trustee Smiley.
Second from Trustee Smiley. Any discussion? Assuming none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you very much, and Chairman is aye as well, so it's unanimous. And thank you very much. Have a great day, and please wear masks and wash your hands. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.